Tales from the wild. Stories from the heart. A journey into the mind and soul of fired-up business professionals where they share their vision for the future. And hear from a different non-profit organization every month as they create awareness of their goals and their needs. Dive into a world of untamed passion as we join our host, Shireen Buerta, for this month's episode of Friends from Wild Places.
And your work now, Phil, is just, I mean, amazing as far as, in the community in Florida. But do you mind walking us through the journey with Nicole as far as, just your journey with her, because for our listeners out there, some of them listen to us monthly and we kind of reference different things, but I'd like them to hear directly from you, your journey with Nicole and how it allowed you to go into this different line of work, and not so much different, but and then an added layer to what you were already doing, right? You're already serving community, already in education, and already in giving back. But if you don't mind just walking us through the journey, because suicide is just a very sensitive topic for many people. So many of us have had loved ones or friends or family that have died by suicide. So can you just walk us through the journey with Nicole and share with us as much as you feel comfortable?
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, Nicole and I actually worked together at the school at the college where I was mentioning earlier. She was in student services on the online division, and I was on the on ground. And like you said, yeah, I think what kind of brought us together too was a common focus on serving others and just also being curious, just being curious creatures of the world, like we really do feel like we were soulmates in a certain perspective, even though that's like a term thrown around a lot, right? But like we really did believe it, complemented each other so well. In particular, like I like to kind of talk about Nicole being she was like a risk taker. We went on first date was skydiving. So like who really does that, right? And even though it was my idea because it was like my 40th birthday and I wanted to do something like, milestone, she clearly was a wild woman and a risk taker. She had been a couple of times before. So the minute she heard that, like she kind of went all out and planned it. And so I thought that was kind of an appropriate way to sort of, whenever I talk about Nicole and our journeys, start off like that, because she was a wild woman. We traveled a lot together too. We actually went to South Africa. It was one of her favorite places.
Oh,
it-
so special.
yeah, yeah. I remember when we arrived there the first night, and we were listening to like the waves crashing and everything in Cape Town, and she's like, I could live here. I was like, oh, me too. So very adventurous. So we were very adventurous. These are the kind of things too that like when you hear about Nicole and I, and it's like you're kind of like, well, what happened? Because like you guys were full of life, and she was 33 at the time and I was 40, so we were together for 7 years. So like, she was in her 30s, just full of life, and um soulmates again. It's hard to kind of think back to um of all of the I don't want to necessarily say good times, but when I describe her, it's kind of like I'm outside of myself, because then it's like so unbelievable that she was in so much psychic pain that was so invisible that I couldn't see that, or her family or friends couldn't see that as well. But yeah, um we were soulmates, and we lived a full and exciting and adventurous life together.
Yeah.
Um,
And the journey, so as far as, together, very adventurous girl, young,
Mhm.
vibrant,
Yeah.
soulmates as you described. And then do you mind sharing with us what happened around that Christmas time, that period that
Oh, yeah.
literally like was just kind of unexpected, right? Out of the blue. It wasn't something that you had seen her friends, family.
Right.
What did that time period actually like unfold for you and your family?
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. So but that time period was really stressful, especially for Nicole. She had gone actually back to school for nursing. She had changed jobs because again, remember like the school we worked for had closed down. So that, pivoted both of us in kind of career directions at the time. And so she was going through a lot of stress going through school and stress at work as well. And then we both had to work on Christmas Eve day, which is, generally stressful, but people have to work on Christmas Eve day and there's always like stress, around the holidays, maybe added stress. But she hadn't been sleeping actually for on and off for about 2 weeks. So I had learned afterwards how important sleep is, especially when folks are really, really stressed out or, um, it really changes your brain and you could like start hearing voices even or like go into like a brief psychotic episode. So she wasn't really sleeping. Now she was on some antidepressant medicine, which I had come to find out she wasn't taking. So there's sort of an indicator. Lots of times when we talk about suicide, it's never just one thing, but it's this puzzle that you're never going to have all of the pieces. But, as survivors and the bereaved, we do go through a process of kind of putting together some of the pieces, even though we're going to have all of them, come up with some of sort of maybe the reasons why. Um, and one of the things is Nicole did struggle with substance use, alcohol in particular. She never really got help for that. So she was drinking a lot during those couple of weeks, and especially that night. And she was diagnosed with ADHD, adult ADHD at one point, and was taking Adderall. And she wasn't abusing Adderall because we all were kind of aware of that, and the autopsies didn't show any indication that she was. However, she did use Adderall to help her focus. And she kind of was very um, aware of that. Like sometimes when she go to the grocery store, she'd be like, "Oh, babe, I have to take Adderall." And it's like, okay, well, to focus. So you could tell she kind of had a hypersensitivity to her, or sort of maybe even like an insecurity or a way of relying on Adderall sometimes to focus when she thought she was had to really focus on things, right? So that night, on the 23rd of December, it was really late, and she was wanting to do like get ahead of some of her work that she knew she had to complete the next day. So she had brought home these like a computer screen for the laptop so she could have a couple of screens to work faster. And she was drinking a lot that night, a lot. And then she had taken Adderall real late. And then at one point, about 11 o'clock, she was trying to put these computers together so she could start working. And we just couldn't get the computer screens to work. And so she did go into a bit of a rage that night and kind of carried on and was making a scene outside and was just real ragey, you know, about not being able to have the computers working. And so like one thing led to another, and it was like, trying to help just de-escalate, come to bed, just come to bed, and just lots of slamming doors and just trying to de-escalate her. And it wasn't though, anything that was out of the norm because when she was drinking and she could rage like that, and you know, most times she would, just come back to bed, or pretty much, clearly every other time she would just sleep it off. But not the case this time. So I went to bed and then I actually found her the next morning and she actually hanged herself from the computer cords.
Wow, wow, wow. It's just the story you've shared, I've heard the story, but
Mhm.
every time I hear it, Dr. Phil, it just brings back just those raw emotions, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And did she leave a note? Was there a note left or
So she
anything?
didn't leave a note. No, I mean, she did leave me a text. It was like at 2:01 a.m. and I found her at 7 o'clock basically a.m. And it said love you XO. And that was the way she would sign like, greeting cards to me or whatever, right? It was like love you XO. So yeah.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, now that I'm into this work with suicide loss and post-prevention work, yeah, I've come to learn that actually only 20% of those who really die by suicide leave a note. So it's
Oh,
not a
that's it.
whole, yeah, it's not like a large sort of percentage. And so many times, even when someone leaves a note, I've noticed and observed it doesn't really make much of a
Yeah,
difference.
it
Yeah.
doesn't, it doesn't solve the it doesn't solve the questions that we
Yeah.
have as you know, as families and
Yeah.
those left
Yeah.
behind. So what was that? So I mean, first of all, just I mean, we so appreciate you just going there with us as far as helping us understand what you're doing now and your work. So
Mhm.
from that moment, so that was Christmas Eve then, right? The Christmas
Yeah.
Eve.
Early
um,
Christmas Eve morning. Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
and then from that point on, how did you like what happened? Like how do you get through the day? What was that? What was it like minute by minute? I mean,
Oh
walk
yeah,
us.
like we talk about that like we say minute by minute, then we're like second by second.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like it's so true. It's literally second by second. Yeah. I was very grateful. I have a supportive family, my own family, as well as Nicole's family, and throughout this whole process, they've been very supportive. So I'm very grateful for that. So, yeah, and at the time I was also working with a really great team and we were really close. So, I just did a lot of reaching out, in that sense, and being around people helped me, at first. Um, yeah. So it was minute by minute. I did go to some therapy at first, but for me, diving into school right away and kind of, serendipitously or whatever, however we want to sort of say that, it being a program that was specifically for therapy was the best therapy for me. Now,
mm,
I spent a lot of money on a degree, but it was worth it because I don't think I could have gotten that kind of sort of therapeutic experience, even if I just went to a therapist, let's say a couple of times a week, even, or however that works. But for me to immerse myself into that is really what I personally needed.
right, right.
Thank
And
you.
you were one last thing is
Yeah.
the when you so the raw emotions around her passing
Mhm.
and then having this pivot, can you walk our listeners through just a general overview of your master's thesis for this degree was dedicated to Nicole?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so what I did was I mean I actually so it was primarily an art therapy degree, so I focused on making art about my experience of losing Nicole. So it was about, a little bit, almost, let's say, about 3 years worth of work. So I created a body of work that as I was noticing was really documenting my path, like visually, from the moment I found Nicole until about 3 years later. So it was really powerful. And I also noticed, though, that instinctively I was actually making art before I even started the art therapy program, probably because of my background in design. And I came more familiar with the fact that that was my language. Like creating was my language, and to express all of the trauma and the grief and the loss. Um, so,
Mhm.
because like I instinctively was just even when you start and some folks might actually do this too, like even just starting off with like, oh, I got to arrange the pictures for, the photos for the funeral, right? It was like I was doing it in such a way that I was creating a story and I was bringing in other images from magazines, and so I literally like was creating a collage and I didn't even know it. It was my first way of like processing, right? And then I kind of got into you know, more in-depth artistic expressions very early on. So yeah, it chronicled my journey. That was what my thesis was.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, just if you just real brief share with the listeners as far as the how the art that first came out of you was very raw, right? Those like you
Yeah, yeah.
like pieces. Can you just walk us through that just from the actual momentum
Yeah. Yeah, I
journey?
mean, they were very raw. They were somewhat primitive, you know. I think part of that too was just, you know, clearly dealing with my own trauma and how it could be even like pre-verbal when there's just no words, right?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, they were really raw. I used a lot of found objects actually. I used like wood and I was creating sculptures and I feel like that also helped me ground myself at first. Um, by using objects and a lot of more like three-dimensional artwork. Um, so that expressed a lot of the rawness. And then just by abstracting a lot of the images that I had in my mind about finding Nicole. I mean, because clearly that was kind of the first sort of part of this that I was processing with the intensive, intrusive, you know, images and abstracting them so I could see them in a different way from a different perspective, as well as just the process of creating and using the materials allowed me to sort of transfer um, all of that torment and trauma into something else. Not that it really ever goes away, but it did soften it, it did take the charge out. There was one point in about February, yeah, when I was creating some pieces, and I physically felt a release in my body, you
Wow.
know.
That's
Um,
so powerful. So
yeah,
like both powerful and empowering
yeah, yeah.
to you. Wow. So like a somatic release, a
Yeah,
somatic.
an absolute somatic release. Yeah. Um,
Good.
yeah.
Okay, I
So,
think
and other people could do it in other ways, you know, when they were writing or exercising and things like that. But for me, it was really about creating the art, you know, and the meaning out of it.
Mm. I'm going to pop in here because I have a few questions of my own just to confirm the thesis and your art show. But before we continue, I just want to add a little bit of a Buzzsprout ad here. So, listeners, Friends from Wild Places, I'm sure you all know, but for the newbies, it is a place to share stories like Phil and from other business owners as well and professionals. It is a safe space for them. So we also feature nonprofits every month to try and make a difference or give a helpline to someone in need. So, do you have a message you want to share with the world, or maybe you think it'll just be fun to have your own talk show? Podcasting is an easy, inexpensive, and fun way to expand your reach online. To start your own podcast, follow the link in the show notes. This lets Buzzsprout know we sent you, and it does help support the show. Remember, the team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed. Tanya and I use this platform to grow our network. We find that networking is super important in growing businesses, in growing, as I said, your reach. So we really love Buzzsprout and what it does for us. But yes, Phil, first of all, I that was the first time I'd actually heard the
Mhm.
story of Nicole. So I was a little bit taken back.
Mhm.
um, So when you talk about, well, when Tanya talks about the thesis and your
Mhm.
art, are you referring to your art show that's called A Step Ahead of My Tormented Mind, or is that something different? And if that is something different, would you like to share a little bit more about that? Because I had a look at it and I'm absolutely in awe of your
Mhm.
art. I think it's beautiful and so expressive. But yeah, so please let us know. Is it the same thing that Tanya's talking about, or was it something else?
Yeah, yeah, it's relatively the same. I most of the pieces that I had made for my thesis um are in the art show. Um Now the thesis was a bit more academic, so there was, you know, more of a methodical, clearly, you know, a methodical way of doing it, and not every piece is up from my thesis is in the art show because I focus on qualitative research, and so I did a lot of like um, um, sort of smaller pieces that then led to a bigger piece. So really which in the world of art therapy would be response art. So I'd make a piece of art and then I would respond to it so it kind of builds in its meaning. So not all of that is in the show, the art show, just sort of like the final pieces. And then there's a few others in the art show that I had made after I had graduated. So it's not 100% the same, my master's thesis and the art show, but the master's thesis basically was the inspiration for the art show.
Mm.
And the art show had was showed in Southeast Florida at Mental Health America, um, and that's also where I work. So yeah, I was honored for them to allow me to have it shown there in one of their galleries.
Yeah. Your art is amazing. Is there a place that people can access it to go and actually see it? Do you have a link or anything of the sort? Or
Not yet, but I'm working on that. Yeah.
I'd like to share
Yeah.
that art. I mean, it is
Yeah.
beautiful and it's very expressive and moving.
Yeah. Thank you.
Um, so tell us a little bit more about loss and what loss does for the community.
Yeah, so very grateful to be a part of Loss. So, like as was mentioned, local outreach to suicide survivors, and in particular, suicide loss survivors. Um, so it's the only program of its kind that's funded in the state of Florida. But originally, it was started a couple of about 30 years ago by a gentleman named Dr. Frank Campbell, and he was a social worker, and as I understand, he had experienced a suicide in his life when he was younger, and he had done some research in the area, and it showed that as he progressed in his career, he had done some research, and it showed that for those who've been left behind or lost a loved one to suicide, it would take about 4.5 years for someone to reach out for help. And because of all the stigma and all of the things around the unique sort of experience, we actually say unique experience of losing someone to suicide. So he started this program, and it was very grassroots, where teams of early those who have also lost a loved one to suicide would go out to scenes of a suicide or shortly after, kind of like alongside first responders to help um, create connection
Mm,
and deliver resources.
mm,
So I think a lot of what sort of started out grassroots were like in communities where maybe they didn't have a lot of access to mental health or access to like services within law enforcement, responding that focused on like human services and things like that. But so I think that's that was like really the need, and then it started to grow. But as it grew over the decades, um, the L in local really becomes important. So each one of these teams in whatever county or jurisdiction that you may reside in are very, very different.
mm,
So in Broward County, which is just outside of Miami, and basically Greater Fort Lauderdale, that's the county we serve, and it's an urban population of about 2 million people. So we really work closely with law enforcement and then victim advocates within the law enforcement agency. So when they do get called out to a suicide, they'll work on their protocols to help us get out there to be with the family right away. And if not right away, then shortly after. And we may do a lot of home visits, but that's our primary role is to connect with folks right away, rather than 4.5 years, matter of really minutes or hours or days. Um, to really though make those that have been left behind or have had experience alone to just show up and give them permission really to talk about suicide, because even as a person who's lost a loved one to suicide, it might be the first time they might even say the word suicide, and it's such a hard word to clearly even just enter your mind, let alone speak. So by us showing up, it just gives them permission, make them not feel alone, give them a little bit sense of hope. Because right now, at that moment, clearly your world has completely changed in so many profound ways.
mm. And if you could give a piece of advice to somebody that has lost somebody through suicide, but does not have a community
Hmm.
or nonprofit like Lost to reach out to, I'm hoping that now we've given a helpline to someone like that in
Hmm.
that position.
Hmm.
But what is that piece of advice that you would give them right now if they're listening?
Yeah, I mean, clearly look to see if you have a lost team in your area. More than won't, because it still hasn't necessarily gained the momentum to be organized within different areas. So it's very, again, sort of grassroots still.
Mhm.
But I would say find ways to connect with other survivors. And the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, or afsp.org, has on their website um, a link where you could even just plug in your zip code and it'll show you where there will be some support groups for suicide loss survivors. You know,
Mhm.
whether they're peer support groups or run by a clinician, most are really peer. That's really where the magic comes from. Um, that's what I would say would be like one of the first steps. Clearly, getting help from a therapist one-on-one is important. What I've learned personally, as well as in my observations of others, meeting with, hundreds of survivors in the last few years, has been meeting with someone else who's gone through a similar experience. That's really what helps the most.
Mm. Tune in next week for part 3 of Friends from Wild Places.
You've been listening to Friends from Wild Places with Shireen Bueta. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast from the links to catch every episode and unleash your passion.